Okay. Okay, so hopefully I will start to appear soon on your screens. There. Just testing. Can everyone hear me? Can those who are there, can you hear me? Just wave or say hello. That'd be great. Keep the questions coming. It's great. Great. Hi everyone. Great. Lovely to see people here. Thank you for coming along tonight. I've upgraded my microphone, so I've got a better microphone than I had last time. So I will hopefully not disappear at some point. If you do have any problems, please write it down in the live chat on the YouTube page, because that's the best way to get it. It just kind of keep that is the most up-to-date thing. I have a picture of myself to the left, which is like slightly behind my actual. It's not a mirror. It's about 5 or 6 seconds behind me, which is slightly weird. It's a bit like having, it's a bit like having my daughter sort of doing imitations of me, which she is definitely want to do. So, welcome to the live stream Q&A, Writing Radio Drama. This is the second of these live streams. I think there's some value in having a moment that's separate from the workshops that we do, that I've done, where you can sort of just ask questions, because one of the things about the workshops is obviously there's a very large number of people. We had, I think, around 300 people at the last one, and it just makes it very difficult to get to everyone's question. So in this session, there are always fewer people, so that hopefully means that if you've got lots of questions, or if you've just got one question, I will do my best to get to every question. I think there are currently like 16 people here, so that's great. So it's like a large room. If we were allowed in such things like a large room. So what are we going to do today? So the format is just I'm going to chat. We're going to chat. I'm going to read your questions. I'm going to answer them as best I can for the next hour or so, and that's kind of it. I'll give you a sort of wee preview of what we're going to be doing on the 30th. If you have questions about radio writing, that's fantastic. If you have questions about other things, that's absolutely fine. So just fire away. So just quickly to say what I'm up to at the moment. I wonder how you found being creative in lockdown. For me, the challenge is twofold, I suppose. The firstly is just time. It's been really difficult to find the time and the space, because I have 2 children, both under school age. So my son is 8 months and my daughter is 3. And while my partner is on maternity leave and so able to look after the kids, able to look after the kids, it's a hell of a job doing that all day, every day. So I have until recently been only writing a few hours a day. But even within those few hours, obviously we're going through a global pandemic, and I work in the theatre as well as radio, and I teach as well at a university. So there's a lot of stress and strain going on in your brain. So I think I've come across this talking to a number of other writers. I feel like if you're doing anything creative at this point, bravo, 10 points, because I think it's really hard. I mean, I have written things. Are they good? I don't know. We'll have to find out. But I think there's something really interesting about having forcing yourself to be creative in such a confined space, which is your home. And even if you live in a mansion, which of course I'm sure lots of you do, there is still that confinement. There's still that sense of not being able to go anywhere, not being able to do anything. And trust me, when you have a 3-year-old who's desperate to go on the swings and you don't have his swings, you definitely feel that confinement. So in terms of my writing life, I would normally be trying to do about 500 words a day. That's what I do as a dramatist. Now, if you're a novelist, that doesn't sound like anything. Novelists on the whole be writing 2,000, 3,000 words a day. But as a playwright, I try and write about 500 words a day. But that has definitely been tricky. And sometimes I've just managed 10 and I've had to be happy with that. So the other things I've been doing is planning new ideas. If I've had new ideas, I've written them down and I've sort of made some planning. I've also been doing a lot of reading, a lot of researching, and I've also had to make lots of teaching plans. I mean, this sort of arose out of a wish, a desire to sort of get better at online teaching, because I knew it was going to be coming down the line. So there's lots of learning that's been happening. So I have a question that I'm going to start with from Jane Rhodes, who wrote to me on Patreon before the session, and her question is on character. Following on from the second writing session, how do you establish it quickly? And what can you sacrifice if there needs to be an edit? What really needs to say? Now, this is a really good question when it comes to radio, because as I think we've touched on before, you've got a very, very specific amount of time that each player's got to fit for an afternoon drama, say. We'll just use that. So the most common radio drama slot is around 44 seconds and 13 seconds. 44 minutes, 13 seconds, I think. And obviously you can't write perfectly to that. There's just like literally no way. So what are the sort of techniques I use to sort of fill that out? Or not fill it out, but get to the point where I might have excess that I can then cut away. Because if I'm honest, I'm not a writer who overwrites. On the whole, I tend not to overwrite. I don't want to overwrite. What I want to do is write something that basically cannot be cut. So it's a really tricky one. One of the things that Kirsty, my radio producer, who you'll meet if you come to the third session, and I do, is we have a kind of traffic light system. So we have things that can definitely go, things that can maybe go, and things that absolutely cannot go. And that because when she's doing the edit, you record the radio play in 2 days, but you edit in a day. I think that's right. Kirsty will quote me, but I think it's only in a day. And so you've got to move quite quickly. And often you need those cuts before the edit, so she can sit there and she can work out if it's too long, what to do. Obviously, the nightmare is being too short. You don't want to be too short, but that's another problem for another day. What I tend to think is that you can cut narration, especially narration that maybe is setting up a scene. So narration is something that can be cut. The other thing I've tended to find is jokes get cut. Jokes, on the whole, don't move character or story forward. They kind of hold it up. Now, they're great for kind of giving you a sense of tone and feeling, and they definitely and they really, they really add quite a lot of color and texture to a piece. But if you were really trying to find seconds to snip, often the jokes go. And I remember this happened to me a couple of times early on in my writing radio career, that a couple of my jokes got cut, and in each drama that I did, and I found the result was that I got considered quite a serious writer for radio, and I was like, but there are jokes, they've just had to be cut out. So that's quite hard. But getting to your first part of that question, Jane, about how do you establish a character quickly, I would say that what you need to do is put that character under pressure as soon as you can, and obviously in the first moment. To give them a sense of who they are. So, to give you an example, I am currently writing a new play called The Tenderness of Boys, and this is an afternoon drama for Radio 4. And this is a play about me, actually. I am the main character. And it's about I bump into my late mother in a supermarket. And, of course, it's not my late mother, it's just a woman. But I don't know that at the time. When I bump into her, I think it's me. And so what you have is this pressure moment where there's this writer who's 40, who's buying a sandwich, and he's just standing there in the sandwich aisle, and there is his mother who's been dead for 15 years. And it's just like, and instantly, that moment, that pressure, that forces a characterization to happen. So we suddenly get like how I react. So I'm not going to tell you how I react, but if I cried, that would give you one indication of who I was. If I laughed, that would be another. Another indication of character. If I ran away, that would be another indication of character. Whatever the reaction is to that situation gives us a sense of character instantly. Another very simple way of doing it is, if you're doing narration, is tone of voice and and the speed and uh, the tone and the pace of it is what I meant when I say speed. I mean pace, really. Is about what their interests are. But I think that's how I would say you establish it quickly. But I think it's often about cutting around the speech as well. So if you've got a really baggy scene, which is maybe like 8 or 9 or 10 pages, see if you can make it 4 and what you actually need, and see if you can really force those characters to sort of get messy with each other. So thank you so much for the questions. Lovely to see people who are arriving a bit later. Thanks so much. So I've got a question from Lisa Marks. I think that's Lisa. Hi, Lover. What do you consider when you're thinking about jumping off point for your play? So essentially, how do you decide where it starts? Okay, so I think I tackled this in my first workshop, which if you haven't seen or didn't get a chance to see, I would you can get it on Vimeo. That one is free. You don't have to be a patron to do that. You can just go and see that. That's free. I talk about a bold image and a big problem. So what that is a dramatic opening. For example, bumping into your dead mother at a supermarket, and then a big problem, which is a kind of something human, which is something that the audience wants to know, which is like, how do you deal with loss? Maybe that's the question. That's the big problem. Or like, how is Oliver going to deal with this crisis in his life where he thinks he sees his dead mother? That's the kind of, so those two things. Another example is a play I've written about tigers. Oh, no, I'll do the When the Pip Stop. When the Pip Stop, which is what we're looking at in the third workshop, which is about two sisters who do not talk to each other, but only listen to Radio 4, and then suddenly one day the radio stops working, and they aren't sure whether it's their broken radio or whether it's the end of the world. So the image there is two sisters on a remote Scottish island, unable to communicate, and then the sort of problem is, what do they talk about now? And that's how I start. And I think if you can put your characters, again, it's a bit like my answer to Jane. If you can put your characters under pressure, if you can grab the audience immediately, and I think with radio that's really key, because as I've talked about before, the switch off time with radio is so fast, people just want to leave. So I'd think of a big, bold, visual image and a sort of meaty problem to get you started. I hope that answers the question. You've got another question, but I'm going to come back to it later, because I'm going to try and take a question from everyone before I return to it. Okay, so I've got one from Dirty Bane Theatre Company. Which organisations are best to be in touch with, keeping an eye on in terms of submissions, contacts? I'm in Scotland. Playwright Scotland, Travis. Yes, I think off the top of my head, I would say the Playwright Studios Scotland is brilliant. They have an opportunities page. I'd also say the BBC Writers' Room website is also great. As I've mentioned before, I got my first break in radio by entering a competition on the BBC Writers' Room website. So those are the two things. And the Travis obviously have a submission thing, and I think, post-COVID, I'm hoping there are going to be more opportunities. I think people are going to be desperate for writers. So I would keep my eye out for all kinds of things. Twitter is also good. I know that sounds a bit silly and difficult to navigate, but if you follow writers, I retweet. I obviously have this, but I also have students, so I will always retweet stuff if I see stuff that I think is going to be helpful to younger writers. So yeah, you can just follow me. I'll do my best for you. Okay. So James Morgan, how would you recommend new writers get professional feedback? I guess by professional feedback you mean by directors or other writers, or even actors, maybe. I think, there's a few different ways of doing it. Firstly, obviously, there is there's courses you can do. So on the sort of there will sometimes be one-off courses. There'll be script surgeries that different theatre companies do, or are available Playwright Studio in Scotland do script surgeries where you can submit a script and a playwright will read it and give you feedback. Also reading services that theatres like Payne's Plough and the Bush and the Royal Court do, and they'll read your stuff and give you feedback. But also you can do courses like the Arvon courses. I mean, they're not cheap. I know. I've done one before, and I'm a tutor on one on radio drama in September, October. Come along if you want to. Again, it's not cheap. I won't, but you will get professional feedback from myself and the other people who are there. The other one is obviously a university course or a more structured writing course. I'm just giving you the examples that I know, which is that I teach the Masters in Playwriting, Screenwriting at the University of St Andrews, and we have this year about 8, 9, 10 students, and we work with them throughout the year, working on their scripts and giving them feedback. And myself and Zinni Harris, who run the course, are professional writers, and obviously, I'm not imagining necessarily that you have the capacity to do a university course, either in terms of time or money, but there are lots of different opportunities for courses, whether it be evening classes or online courses. Again, I think this is something that the things that we're doing today, for example, is something that I think might blossom at some point or proliferate, shall we say, and that there will be opportunities to get your work read by professionals. It is hard until you're getting going. That's other writers as well, I suppose. But I would say sending stuff out, sending it to the BBC, sending it to the theatres, sending it to TV production companies. That is the best way. It takes a long time. People don't get back to you. It's very frustrating. But it is there isn't really any shortcut to that. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so Hugh Hick. Oh, hang on, where's it gone? Disappeared. I saw your advice on Twitter this week. Oh, you've been reading Twitter again, Hugh. It's very dangerous. This week about redrafting from scratch each time. Do you have any other tips about redrafting? Any particular things you look out for when you come back to a script? Yeah, I suppose I won't redraft immediately. I will, if I can, I will write a script, and I will send it to whoever I need to send it to, whether it be my director or my producer or just friends who might be up for reading it, people who I've done favors for. So there's a lot of quid pro quo. I've read stuff for other people, and they read my stuff, and it's very helpful. I will then leave it. I'll gather all those notes, and I won't write anything. I'll just kind of gather all those notes together, and I'll put them, and I'll maybe type them up, put them on a file, and then I'll leave it for as long as I possibly can. Usually, my dream would be that it's months or a month at least, but usually I don't have that kind of time. Usually it's a week at best, and then I have to return to it and rewrite it. Or if I'm lucky again, I might move on to a different project. So I'll be writing the first draft of one thing, finish that, put that aside, and then start on a second or third draft of something else before I move on to something else. I tend not to like to do back-to-back first drafts just because it's exhausting coming up with original work, and you might find that you're ending up repeating yourself. So I try and leave a gap. So I think write something, put it in your files, print it out or whatever you want to do, and get people to read it if you can. It doesn't need to be loads of people, the first draft. I think it can just be like 2 or 3 people. That's really helpful. It can be your mum, it can be your dad, it can be your partner, it can be your children, whatever. Just get, it's just helpful to get their feedback, and then just leave it. And then when you come back to it, hopefully you're seeing it afresh, and that really makes a difference, I think. What else? I think one of the reasons, again, I'll go back to the 500 words thing, which I said earlier, which is that I write 500 words a day. There's another thing that's useful about that, which is that you're plodding. And I force myself to try and stick to that, in the sense that when I'm doing a second draft, especially, or a third draft, I try and only do 500 words a day, because that way I don't get ahead of myself. Yeah, sometimes it's brilliant to get enthusiastic and you feel like, oh, I'm nailing this, I can just keep going. But actually, if you keep yourself slow, you'll give yourself time to reflect and make sure that you're still, you're not exhausting yourself. Because as much as anything else, writing a script, whether it be a 5-minute play, a 45-minute play, or a 2.5-hour play, is a marathon, because it's about creating a world and creating a narrative, creating a story. So you really do want to try and pace yourself. And I think that makes a difference. I think if I have any other thoughts, Hugh, I'll come back to you. But that's my major thought for you today. Um, okay, so I've got one. This is O Clary O, which I quite like. I don't know. I imagine that's not your name, but I quite like it. Do you have any advice on coming up with good plots? Um, yes. Um, what I'd say about coming up with good plots is I'd really concentrate on the stories that you love. Um, I I really, for example, one of the best plots I've seen in recent times, and it's so pure and so clear, is Gravity, the movie Gravity. I don't really like using movie examples because I don't write movies. I write radio and I write theatre, and they're very different. But one of the things I like about that is that you've got this story, which is this woman who is in space and she's stuck there and she's got to get back. And every time, that's a simple mission. So the first thing is you've got a really simple mission, which is that I'm in space and I've got to get back to Earth. That's it. So the story, overall arc, is dead simple. In terms of plot, what happens is that every time there is an opportunity to save herself, something goes wrong. And the way it's done, which is so clever, which is that every time something gets worse and gets worse and gets worse and it gets worse. And I think that's really key, which is that you kind of got to put them in as much trouble as possible. So that's an example of a story that I really like. So what I would do is I would look at the story, like gather together all the stories that you like. So like I've got just an example, like I've got loads of different things by my desk right now. So I've got a bit of Carl over Kanalstad. I've got Virginia Woolf. I've got Dos Danik, which is a thing about Swedish death cleaning. I've got Rebecca Solnit, who I love, and Max Porter's Lanny. Well, I'm having to adapt that, so that's actually not a book I'm reading so much as working on. But I will get the books are something that I find really inspiring. I think about. I like words, but I also like narrative, and so novels I find very interesting. So they'll be things I gather around me. But I'll also find plays that I like, movies, music. Music's a really good one too. I like just trying to all of the different things, and so there's some sort of form of narrative classical music which I find really inspiring. Well, I mean, even I was listening to Eric Satie the other day with my baby, because Eric Satie calms babies down. Hot tip. So does Bach, actually. Bach's cello concertos work for babies, because apparently cellos sound a bit like a human voice, and so that calms them down. Anyway, sidetrack. But there's something so beautifully human about the Eric Satie that I almost felt like I could hear a human voice, and and maybe it sounds silly, but I suppose that I feel like I could create a narrative from that, and a plot from that, and I think it's about that. I think it's about like internalizing some of the narratives that you come across in other works of art, until the point where you're feeling really comfortable about writing your own. I think in terms of when it comes to exciting plots, it is always about putting your characters under as much pressure as possible. That's the theme of today, obviously, putting people under pressure. Okay, so so Tracy Hayward. I'm struggling with deciding on obstacles. Do you have a process for this, or do you just know? No, I don't just know. I think that's a really good one. I think there's the sort of joke that Raymond Chandler said, which is that when he got stuck, he always had a man come in through the door with a gun. And I remember being stuck on one of my very early plays. I was still living at home with my mum and dad, and I remember saying, I'm a bit stuck, and my dad said, "Oh, just have a man walk in the room with a gun." And so I tried it, and actually it worked. I wouldn't recommend it all the time. It's not necessarily suitable, but sometimes having a man come through the door with a gun's really good. I think obstacles are really interesting. I guess it's a little bit about what does your character really want. So, for example, I think we use Romeo and Juliet as an example in the second workshop, and maybe that's a useful one. So the obstacles to Romeo's love Firstly, is that he's already got a girlfriend. The second one is that his family and Juliet's family are at war, and the last and will kill him if they see him. And the last sort of one is that he physically can't get there because she's in a different house and he's down on the ground. There isn't one where he happens to be repulsively unattractive and she doesn't fancy him. The convenience, one of the obstacles he doesn't have to face is the fact that they both instantly fall in love with each other just by looking, which is obviously terrific and happens a lot in real life. But what's interesting there is that his desire is love, and so the obstacles are physical, political, and violent, I suppose. And so it's about thinking about that really. It's just about logic. It's about following it through. So I'm incredibly poor, and I don't have any money, and I'm a playwright, and the theatres are all shut. So I decide to rob a bank, but I have no experience at robbing banks. I don't know anything about guns. I don't know anything about driving fast cars. I've got a quite faulty Ford Focus. But I do have a mask. So at least I have a mask. So the obstacles to me becoming a successful bank robber are my inexperience and my lack of weaponry, perhaps, and a bad car. But I do have a mask. That's on my side. And maybe so. What I would try and do is get a friend who's got a really fast car. So I've got a friend called Danny who's got a really good car. So I try and get Danny on board. And then I know this mad farmer who lives just around the corner from us who's got a gun. So maybe I'll try and steal the gun from him, or I'll try and get him into the plot as well. So like you start to see that all of those obstacles are starting to exist, and then I'm trying to find ways to overcome them. I mean, I'm not sure that's a brilliant example, but that's the example I came up with. I don't know why I thought bank robbery. Don't do bank robbery. I mean, you can write it, but just don't actually do it. This is the internet. I don't know what anyone's going to do. So Lorna, given theatre is at standstill at the moment, is it a good idea to rewrite a stage play into a radio play? That's a really good one. Thank you for the question, Lorna. I don't know the answer to that. Is it a good idea? Well, it depends on what your ambition is. Is it your ambition to get it broadcast on the BBC? And if it's your first time, then yes, I think it's a good idea. The way it works, and we'll talk about commissioning in the third workshop with Kirsty, but the way it works is that there is like a commissioning round every year that I think starts around spring or February, March time, excuse me. And that's when you put ideas in. And if you are a new writer, you have to have written the whole play. So the answer is that's how you would do that. Theatre and radio work so what I suppose I'm saying is theatre and radio work completely separately. There obviously has been the Lockdown Festival that's on Radio 4 and Radio 3, and that's fantastic that Bernie Carvel put together, which is like plays that were meant to be on, which are now being put on radio. But as you notice, they're all like big plays in big theatres in London mostly. So I think it's not... Radio producers aren't at the moment shy of lots of ideas, and they also don't have loads of money, I don't think, or new money to replace the theatre industry. Having said that, I suppose as a writer, I would say if you're really interested in radio writing, then write a radio play. I wouldn't substitute one for the other. I don't do that, for example. I write theatre plays and I write radio plays. A couple of them have made the switch. I wrote a radio play. I wrote a stage play called One Night in Iran that became a Radio 3 play, and I'm turning my play A History of Paper into a stage musical at the moment. Other than that, those are the only two. Everything else I keep quite separate. So my answer is, I think write a stage play and write the best possible stage play you can, and then send it in to anyone or a theatre company that might be interested in doing it, and just and wait for the theatres to reopen, and hope that will happen. Or write a radio play and then go through into that. But I would say that mixing them up or thinking that you can swerve from one to the other isn't the way it's going to work. Probably, I could be wrong, but my guess is, and I'm not an industry expert, I should say this, I'm just a writer, like you guys. So, but my experience is that radio producers like plays that seem like radio. They don't necessarily like plays that seem like theatre. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Radio 3 is an exception to that. I'm just going to sip of my tea, so my mouth isn't too dry. I don't feel like I answered your question very satisfactorily there, Lorna, but I hope it was something useful there. J content. Do you sit down and close your eyes when you listen to a radio play, or do you do the washing up, etc.? Also, do you give up on listening to a radio play if it doesn't grab you in the first 5 minutes? Yes, I do give up. If I don't like it in the first 5 minutes, absolutely. I reckon I get to the first chapter or two on a book if I don't enjoy it. I reckon I get 3 minutes into a TV thing. I don't really like TV that much. A film, I might watch most of it before I throw it away, because I just notice when I go on my phone. If I'm on my phone during watching a film, I'm not grabbed by it. But on the whole, I will stop listening to a radio play. But where do I listen to radio plays? I don't listen to my own live, if that makes sense. I don't listen to them when they come out on the radio. I find it a bit. I get a bit anxious about it, I suppose, and I find I get worried that I've maybe mucked something up, or the line isn't right, or isn't very good, or something like that. So I tend to listen to my own radio plays another time, or I'll listen to a bit of a radio play, rather than listen to all of it. In terms of listening to other people's radio plays, the best place for me is the car. I don't know whether you find this, but I really like listening to radio plays in the car, because whether you've got a good car or a crap car, you've got all the speakers on, and so you can really hear the whole thing, and you can kind of get absorbed in the world. And like a long journey is really terrific. And so I like doing that. But yeah, in terms of my own radio plays, I try not to listen to them. I listen to, obviously, when I'm in the studio working on them, I listen to them acutely, and I think that's part of the thing, is that I have the visual memory of the actors doing it, so that sort of interferes with my experience of it. So there are some radio plays of mine. I'm not going to tell you which ones I haven't listened to. Vicky McRae, hi. What would your advice be for someone looking into writing masters? Do you feel that this is the best route for aspiring dramatic writers, or is it worth trying to get opportunities yourself? Okay, so hi Vicky. Good question. Now, obviously, I teach a masters, so I'm going to say that doing a masters is a really good idea. And there's part of me which thinks it's a good idea now as well, or in the next couple of years, while the industry is, especially the theatre industry, is rebooting, because that is what's going to happen. I mean, terrible news today from Plymouth about the Theatre Royal there, and them effectively losing all their staff, which is absolutely terrible. And we don't know how long or what the situation is going to be, whether the government will come in and rescue theatres or not. So in a sense, if you can get funding or have the money, studying is a useful way to do it. The way that we do our masters, and I'll talk about other masters in a second, but our masters is that we see it as we've built it as a route into the industry, so that you will get experience of us as professional writers, Zinni and I, and you'll hopefully get an opportunity to come and see some work that we do, whether it be rehearsals or recording or filming, whatever. And you'll also get your own chance to write a sort of a portfolio of work. So you'll be writing stage, you'll be writing radio, and you'll be writing screen. And hopefully, as part of that, you'll get to meet other professionals. and that can be a brilliant thing. And there are lots of these courses now. There's obviously, if you're into dramatic writing, there's the Birmingham course. There's a course in Manchester, the writing school there. Simon Stevens teaches on that one. There is the one at UEA, which I did. I did the University of East Anglia, but I did the novel writing course. I wrote a terrible novel, and by the end of the first semester, I absolutely knew I was going to be a playwright, and so I just had to finish this terrible novel. It was really bad, and I never wrote another novel. But I've written lots of plays. And where else is there? There's loads of good ones in London as well as there's Goldsmiths and other places like that. It really depends if I were you, I'd have a look at the courses, see what excites you, and Edinburgh. There's also one in Edinburgh. See what excites you, and the writers who you get excited by, that you think, I want to be taught by them because I love their work. That's how I did it, and I think that's sort of the best way of doing it. Really, getting access to writers is sometimes quite hard and sometimes quite easy, but I think it is definitely a route into it. It's not necessarily the only route into it. I did a master's in novel writing, so really it didn't help me at all. And I came up through the Fringe, so I was doing Edinburgh Fringe work, and then this was the early noughties when you could still get funding for new writing. So I was based in Yorkshire at that time, and we got money to do a tour of the UK with a new play that I'd written. I was 23, which is insane. Well, it feels wild that was possible. Even almost 20 years ago now, but it's sort of it's a different world now. But I would say that industry experience is hard to come by. It's not impossible at all, but it is hard, and I think there is an advantage if you can to doing a playwriting masters, but it's what you make of it really, and the kind of person that you are, and the whether you take advantage of opportunities. If you're someone who is very good at meeting people and very up for meeting people, then I'm sure that you can do that without necessarily doing a master's. And if you are really willing to put the work in yourself, I said, like I did, like I said, I have never had any training as a playwright, and I think that I've had to learn it on the job, as it were. I wrote a lot of bad plays in my 20s. That's probably the answer to that. But okay, so I hope that answers your question. Obviously, I said St Andrews. Think of St Andrews. Okay. Charis, hello. Hi. Is there anything we can read that suggests different options for presenting the action, e.g. flashback, different viewpoints, and any tips for handling flashback, suggestions of plays that do it well? I think I sort of touched on this in my second workshop, which is I'm not a fan of flashback. I think drama moves forward in real time, doesn't it? So we are sitting in the theatre or we're listening to the radio and things move forward. So we're experiencing time in a forward motion. Novels and film do flashback really well. I suppose they might be the way to look at it. But I think theatre and radio tend not to do flashback very well. Having said all that, I do use mechanisms to go back into the past, but I'm quite playful with it. So in my new play, I meet myself aged 8, but I am me aged 40 meeting my 8-year-old self. So I suppose that is one way to do a flashback, but I'm not really flashing back so much as letting myself go into it. I mean, obviously, a great example of that, just made me think of it, was Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. That's a really good example of how you do a flashback, which is you have someone lead you through it. But I would tend to avoid flashbacks, and I think I made this clear in the second workshop, but just to sort of to reiterate, I think it's because you're putting it. You don't want to do too much explaining, if that makes sense. You want to be moving your characters forward in time, and 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 revealing themselves as they move forward, rather than taking a break and letting the audience off the hook and then going, and the reason this person has murdered this other person, is because in their childhood, etc., etc., etc. You want to keep moving forward, and you want someone just to go, why are you doing this? And the other person to sort of deny it or something like that. So you kind of keep pushing forward. It's definitely true of drama more than it's true, as I said, of novels and films. I don't really do it, so I guess that's my answer. Clever ways to do it. There are lots of clever ways to do it. I think Christopher Shin does it really well in some of his early plays. I can't think of a play off. I can't play the name of it top of my head, but there's a story with twins, which is played by the same actor, where one walks in and one walks out. Another really good example is actually The River by Jez Butterworth, where you are discombobulated into realizing that, as an audience member, you're discombobulated because you don't realize, you think he's on a journey or on a retreat with one woman, and then another woman walks through the door and suddenly they're in the past, or are they? It's quite interesting and playful. So actually those are two good examples. So hopefully that is useful. But I said I'm a little bit flashback phobic because I think it slows everything down, but that's hopefully helpful anyway. Okay, so yes. Oh, so Donald. Yes, I saw your blog and I had a look at this. So I sent a play to radio, BBC Radio 4. I heard nothing. 2 years later, I heard an almost identical play broadcast, plot, characters, theme, tone, and many scenes were remarkably similar. What would you do? Okay, so this is a hard one because it's not a hard one. It's sort of, there are two things to think about here. One is that, as I understand it, and I'm not an intellectual property expert at all, so again, I'm just a playwright, and let's put that caveat as a sort of ticker tape over the bottom. As I understand it, there is no copyright in an idea, only the expression of that idea. So if you lived, whatever it was, 450 years ago, and you had written a play about a Danish prince who had a problem with his stepfather and his mother, there would be nothing that you could do about Shakespeare's Hamlet if you'd even mention it to him in a cafe, because if that idea in itself doesn't hold any, you don't have any copyright to that. Obviously, set aside the fact that Shakespeare in England didn't have copyright. You don't have the right to your own idea in that sense, as I understand it. Now, I might be wrong about that. So that's that. The second thing is that the BBC is huge and vast, and I don't know which department you would have sent your idea into or your script into, but you'd have to prove a link between the producer that you sent it to and the producer that made the new play. Can I be honest and say that I've done exactly the same thing, not with BBC, but I wrote a play about teenagers and MS. And I'd spent 2 years working on it, and then I did a showcase reading of it. And at the same venue, I didn't know this at the time, there was another play by a much more significant playwright, famous playwright at the time, who I'd never met personally and didn't know, who'd written a play about teenagers and MS. And it's a coincidence. He had obviously no idea what I was working on, and I had no idea. And I started my play before him. He wrote his play very quickly, and then it was performed. But that play just had to be put aside, and that's just what happened. It's disappointing. It's frustrating. It's weird because these ideas exist. You sometimes think, how did this idea come about? What it did teach me, and I suppose, because I think the thing about being a writer for me is, I love it because one of the reasons I love it is because it gives me agency. I have agency. I can decide what I'm writing about, and no one else can. I suppose what it pushed me towards is to try and make me the most me writer I can be. No one is going to mistake my writing for another's writing, because I'm not going to have the same plot. I'm not going to have the same characters. I'm not going to have the same scenario as other people. I'm going to do my best to try and create dramas that only I can create. And I guess it's awkward because I'm sort of telling you to get over it and move on, but I don't know that on a sort of writing level or on a mental health level there's anything else to be done on it, because I just think I think you just have to. I think one just has to sort of move on. And again, in my personal experience, the idea that a BBC producer over here would know what a BBC producer over here had read would be very unlikely to me. But even if they did, it would be secondhand, and I think one would have a very hard time proving plagiarism. Obviously, Simon Brett and Jeremy Front are hugely experienced writers of many decades as well. Like you sort of you it would feel very surprising if that'd be the case. I think the truth is, in your particular instance, I think that idea is something that one could imagine them coming up with. Obviously, that may not satisfy you, but that's my reading of it. Yeah, sorry. It's again, it's not necessarily the answer you want to hear, but it's a tough thing. Okay, right. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to answer another question from James here. You said your first opportunity came via BBC Writers' Room. Can you briefly discuss the piece you wrote, and on reflection, why do you think it was successful? Oh, I don't think it was successful. I didn't like it very much. Um, it was called By the Light of the Moon, and the competition was to write a sort of twist on a crime and thriller. And I may have mentioned this, that I wrote it as it's about a man who decides to commit suicide, and so hires a hitman to do it because he's lived such a boring life. He decides to have an interesting death. But when the hit person turns up, it turns out to be a woman, a beautiful woman at that, and so he decides to then, well, they end up falling in love. 15 minutes, very silly in lots of ways. I didn't love it. It wasn't that I didn't think the performances were great. I did. I just didn't like my writing. I felt I was too gentle, and I was kind of writing a Radio 4 play that you'd expect, not something that not something original enough, I suppose. So it wasn't until I wrote, and then I wrote one more, and I didn't, and that was while I was still down south. And then I didn't write any radio plays for a few years. It was only when I came to Scotland that I wrote a radio drama called Daniel and Mary, which is originally titled Cocoa Pops and Vodka, but because of Cocoa Pops being a brand name I wasn't allowed to use, I decided to. So that was a play which I wrote very quickly, and that was a play that I knew was really good. I wrote it, and it was one room, two actors, straight through 30 minutes of non-stop story, where he is an alcoholic and she is his estranged daughter, and he is trying to make her breakfast, and that's the whole action of the play. And I wrote it in 4 days, and I was really excited about it, partly because it was different than other radio plays in the sense that it wasn't didn't have any narration. It was straight through. I hadn't heard a straight through drama for a very long time, and it kind of accumulated feeling and emotion and meaning as you went through, and you had to listen quite attentively as an audience member. And yeah, I just really liked. I was really proud of the characters and the story, and I think that's what I think that was my breakthrough play for me as a writer, because again it was on BBC Scotland. I don't know that not many people heard it, but I really connected with what I'd written. I'd written what I'd wanted to write, and I think that was exciting to me. Yeah, I think that's kind of how that was, and I think the characters were interesting, and it was exciting, and you weren't expecting what happened to happen, as it were. So yes, I really did. I think that's probably the play where I felt like I arrived in terms of my own radio writing and my own radio voice. And I think that's something that that you need to find. I do think it takes a couple of radio plays. and I say this with the privilege of being a white, straight male, middle class at that. And I think you know, I was fortunate enough to meet the right producer in Kirsty Williams, and I was fortunate enough to kind of have to move. I think it was quite useful to move to Glasgow because I took myself out of the bubble I'd been in down south, which I hadn't found very creative or exciting. But suddenly I felt very excited, and I was surrounded by very exciting people in Glasgow, and that really galvanised me. I also think I was persistent, and I just really loved radio, and I really wanted to write it. So I think that is something. But I really wouldn't claim that that the privileges I've had haven't had an effect in terms of my ability to learn as a writer and fail. I think that's the thing that you notice is that some people fail upwards, don't they? Okay. Christine, how do you use software like Fade-In? I don't know what that is. Sorry, Christine, I have no idea what that is. I'll tell you what I write on. I write on Word. I just use Office Word. I've always used it. I write in the same font I've always written in since I was a baby writer. I had a typewriter. I was at university, actually a word processor, which only had 3 lines in it. And once I'd finished writing it, that disappeared and printed out. So I'm really sorry. I don't know how to answer that. That's not a very helpful answer, is it? Okay, so Vicky has asked another question, which is, what is the best way to have your radio play seen or heard? Is it best to wait for comp submission windows or just send in? So I think it's really good to, if you're talking about BBC writing, you should definitely send it in during the windows, the competitions, anything you see like that. That's absolutely the best way because that will probably have the most amount of attention on it, and they'll probably have lots of readers on that, so your stuff will get read relatively quickly and you'll get feedback. The other way of doing it, which is the long way round of doing it, which I think I've mentioned before, is to write to a producer you like, or even a writer you like. So some people have written to me. I'm not saying you should do that, but you can if you want to. And tell me and say, I've written this play about so and such. I'm looking for a producer. Do you know of anyone who might be interested in reading it? And I can maybe point you in the direction of the person. But the best way is probably just to listen to the radio dramas and notice the ones you like. And when you found one you like, and you think, oh, that producer did a really good job on that, and I really like that play, maybe you write to them and ask if you can send your script. I would always write to ask if you can send your script. Don't necessarily just send your script. Producers do have reading time. It is their job to find new writers, but don't presume that they have that opportunity at that point, because that their years will be, it's about being professionally understanding that that people don't have infinite amount of time, and that they're not necessarily going to be able to read your stuff immediately. I think patience is a big thing. I think if I haven't given this tip already, the way that I think you can keep yourself healthy and happy as a writer is to write something, send it off, and forget about it for a bit, and write something else. As soon as I finish something, I write something else. I start something else, even if it's just reading and researching. So I'm not just standing by the phone or the letterbox waiting for people to standing by the phone. No one stands by the phone. That's such an old-fashioned phrase. Everyone's got their phone on them all the time. Anyway, I'm not just sitting there waiting for a phone to ring. I am, I said, it's a bit about feeling in control, because I think there's something about control, especially early on when you're waiting for plays to come back to you. If it's any consolation, I've been writing for plays for almost 20 years now. I sent off a play to a bunch of theatres in England in October last year. Haven't heard from a single one. So that is a good 6-7 months, isn't it? Even longer. But doesn't matter. I've just got to keep writing, see what happens. Maybe they didn't like it. Okay, I'm just going to run through this and see if there's any other questions. So I reckon I've got time for one more question. Lorna says, I got a play long listed, but then didn't get by the Travis and didn't get any further. Well, I'll tell you what. The thing is, Lorna, I really never won a competition or anything like that. I didn't really get longlisted for anything. Obviously, the game has changed somewhat in the sense there are a lot more of these competitions. But I would say it's persistence and sort of allowing yourself to develop as a writer, and know that you can, that each play will teach you something about the art of playwriting. So just keep going. That's what I'd say. Okay, what else have we got here? I feel like there was another question that someone asked. There was a repeat early on. Okay, yeah, it was from Lisa at the top. It was, who gave you your best piece of advice and what was it? So I was lucky enough to have a mentor, Richard Bean, at the when I was relatively early as a writer. We're very different writers, not at all the same. He's obviously a comic writer of brilliance. I think he did One Man, Two Governors, if you don't know. But he was super nice, and we got on really well, even though our writing was so different. But he said to me, write for actors. If you write for actors, actors will want to be in your plays and they'll do them well. And I think that's something that I really learned a lot from. I think that's exactly right. I write for actors. I think I'm an actor's writer. Is that a thing? I think it is. I'm an actor's writer in the sense I try and write the parts for actors that they really, really want to play. And I think actors enjoy being in my plays because they get to do lots of things and they get to do interesting things. I hope. I have to ask some actors actually, but maybe don't. You can ask actors if you want to, but I don't know that I'm going to. But yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice, which is, so I suppose what that means is that every part, however small, I really put a lot of effort into trying to make it worthwhile for the actor to be in. So if you're only in one scene of my play, I try and make that scene really good, so that you've got a lot of opportunity to do your thing. Yeah, I'm just going to check the other side. No, that's fine. There are no other questions there, I think. So we're coming up to time. That's perfect. I'll just say thank you so much for coming along. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to hear from people and to kind of have your questions, and your level of interest is really exciting to me. I wish you luck with your writing. If you want to become a patron on Patreon, that's fantastic. If you want to buy me a coffee on Ko-Fi, I really appreciate it. The workshop is next Tuesday, so if you haven't registered, do that. That would be super. I think the pinned tweet is on my pinned tweet on Twitter. Will give you some more information. But yeah, thank you so much. And I think I'll do maybe one more live stream after this, and then this series of workshops is going to sort of finish at the end of June. If you have any suggestions for how how you might want to interact in the future, whether you have enjoyed this, please let me know. My email is attached to that sign-in sheet, so please just email me and let me know what you think. I haven't made up my mind exactly what I'm going to do and how I'm going to continue, but I'll try and do something in the future. But thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and yeah, I'll hopefully see you all soon. Thanks very much.